Hey there, Altenew friends, welcome back to another perfect pairing with me. Let's wrap up 2024 with the crafting tools that had the greatest impact on my crafty year and how I think they will change the way I create in 2025. Before we get into today's project, make sure you subscribe to the Altenew channel for more card making and paper crafting tutorials. My Perfect Pairings with Jaycee series explores crafting techniques that effortlessly blend sure-to-love new releases and well-loved Altenew favorites. If you love these kinds of crafty tutorials, hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of my videos airing on the 2nd and 4th Sunday. The BetterPress system and Altenew's pairings of BetterPress plates are items that I continuously went through in 2024. One of the amazing things about the BetterPress plates is that you can ink them and also foil with them. And I found the pairing of texture, ink, and shine all in one item to be so perfect for 2024, and it's just something that I kept going to every time Altenew released an Essential Textures press plate or any of their BetterPress compatible items. I've shown the Essential Textures Gilded Marble press plate time and time again, but the Essential Textures collection is just an easy way to get a statement background that perfectly pairs with any of your sentiment dies. I have a panel of A2 sized white cardstock already nestled and set up in my BetterPress system, and underneath the white cardstock I have the Essential Textures Gilded Marble press plate. From the warm gray family of inks, I'm going to use evening gray to ink up the press plate and transfer this ink onto my cardstock. I will also apply a little bit of morning frost on some of the open areas I haven't inked yet, and this will give me a slight variation of color on my press plate. And here's that result of the first layer. While my glimmer system is heating up off camera, I'll apply a little bit of ink to this panel while it's still on the platen. I'm grabbing Morning Frost again and a large ink blending brush. And I'm using Morning Frost to add a slight gradient on two opposing corners of my cardstock panel. In this Gilded Marble press plate, I feel like adding a little bit of this ink gives the illusion that the veining runs deeper into the marble. On my glimmer system, I'm going to use this gold foil and press the opposite texture on the BetterPress plate onto this panel so that I end up with this foiled background. Like I mentioned earlier, I now have my statement background ready for any die cut sentiment or stamped sentiment if that's what you have. I'm filming this card a little bit before the holidays, and so I thought the Shine Bright sentiment in Timeless Sentiments 3 die set was going to be fitting and fill this entire card front. I used brushed gold cardstock to act as my offset layer for the sentiment, and then I stacked 3 layers of white cardstock with the sentiment die itself. Then I put the two together by foam mounting the sentiment onto the center of my panel, and it's already on a folded note card base. And that finishes my first favorite of 2024. I think the BetterPress plates are here to stay, and I hope that Altenew continues the Essential Textures collection, so that we can see more exciting Altenew backgrounds make it to the forefront. For my second tool and technique that I'm loving for 2024 that I hope carries on to 2025, I'll first showcase with the Translucent Foliage Craft Your Life Project Kit. This is the December 2024 project kit. I won't use the embossing folder on this card, so I'll focus on the die set, the stamp set, and the stencil set that are included in all of the project kits. On my original stamp wheel, I'm adding a panel of white cardstock. On my white cardstock panel, I set up images B, C, I, G, and D. And since I have warm gray fresh dye inks out already, I'll use Lava Rock to stamp these outlines. After stamping all of the outlines on my white panel, I'll transfer this cardstock to my 9x12 sticky matte grid. And I'll use the Simple Coloring Stencil Set Translucent Foliage to fill in all of the elements and outlines of this card. I want an overall light impression on these images, so I'm leaving a lot of empty white space as I'm ink blending. And for now, I'm sticking to lighter values, like Morning Frost. While Altenew has a variety of sizes for their ink blending brushes, and although I really love the mini ink blending brushes, The blending brushes I've really started to quietly gravitate toward are the detail blending brushes, which come in a tube and a set like this. And what I've really started to love doing with the stencil sets that have more of this open base layer is to incorporate little stroked details into the open areas and color them as if I'm using alcohol markers. And it doesn't require a lot of ink to add just a little bit of dimension to get that really soft yet detailed feel to your stamped images. I'm using the detail blending brush to add these stroked elements to the edge of the foliage. And you really cannot achieve this with the mini ink blending brushes. If you have the micro blending brushes, this is a great alternative as well. But what I'm doing is adding just slight little shadows and details to the edges of these leaves as if they are folding backward in the bouquet. And you'll see when I lift up the stencil on this eye layer, in comparison to the other leaves, you get just that little bit and touch of depth and dimension. And it's going to make these leaves stand out a little bit more. And then once we get into the floral elements in translucent foliage, using the detail blending brushes is just going to make it look a little bit more polished and refined. So I'll continue with Moonrock on this G layer. And for me, I use the detail blending brushes slightly different than I would any of the flat bristles. Instead of a swirling motion with the flat bristle blending brushes, so like the large ink blending brushes, mini ink blending brushes, small ink blending brushes, I am adding this ink in a directional stroke. Then I'll finish with the D layer and Moonrock. And you'll notice too, I'm starting off the stencil and bringing the ink towards the image. This way I get a nice transition of ink towards the end of my stroke. So you'll see it's sort of like a flicking motion instead of a scrubbing motion. All the leaf images are found on stencil 4, and that finishes those details. Then I'll move on to the flowers, starting with layer letter C. And for the flowers, I really want a light overall impression. So I'm starting with Strawberry Fresh Dye ink and a mini ink blending brush. And I'm starting from the center of the flower working outwards, working this color about halfway up the petal. I'll move on to Dusty Pink and add just a touch of this color about a third of the way up the petal. Then with another number 5 detail blending brush, I'll do a similar technique with what I did on the leaves, which is apply directional strokes from the edges of the petals going towards the center of the flower. So that's 2 of the petals in this image. I will go ahead and fill in the remainder of the flowers that I've stamped using Strawberry, Dusty Pink, and using my detail blending brush to blend in layers of Dusty Pink at the edges of the petals. So that's the coloring on the first flower. Stencil number 2 is where you'll find the layering images for image letter B. In addition to Strawberry and Dusty Pink, I will add in Blush Rose just to add some variation to this bouquet. Just like the previous flower, I'll take Strawberry and quickly add this ink about 2/3 of the way up the petal, Dusty Pink about halfway, then finally Brush Rose about 1/3 of the way up the petal. So really that's just a little bit to the center of this flower. However, to add the folded details to these petals, I'll still use Dusty Pink and the directional strokes with the number 5 blending tool. And just like the foliage, I'm starting off the stencil and pushing that ink towards the center of the flower. So there's the first 3 petals. Then after adding Strawberry, Dusty Pink, and Blush Rose as my base layer, I'll finish off this image with blended areas of Dusty Pink. Before I move on to die cutting, I do want to redefine the center areas of these flowers. I am going to use my same stamping color, which is Lava Rock, to redefine the anther and pistil of both of these images. So I'm referring to this image here. And after this ink dries back a little bit, I'll use the translucent foliage die set to cut out the images that I stamped. After die cutting all my pieces, I planned for this sort of arrangement. And I also went ahead and stamped Have a Lovely Day in Moonrock Fresh Dye ink. and I'll use this as my sentiment banner for this bouquet. Before I glue anything to my panel, I'm actually going to create my simple background to give more of that translucent feel to this translucent foliage set of images. With a larger ink blending tool and strawberry fresh dye ink, I'm adding a gradient from the top of my cardstock down towards the center. I'm also going to add just a touch of blush rose to the very top of this, just to slightly deepen this top corner of my panel. Now I can assemble this card. I'll return the arrangement that I had originally planned earlier to this now ink blended panel. Before I add my sentiment, I want to embellish this card. I'm going to add a little bit of jet black ink spray around this bouquet. If you're a long-time watcher of my Perfect Pairing series, you'll also know I would usually add pure white ink spray to a background like this, but because I have a lot more white space than I usually do, I want to use Iridescent instead. This will add a little bit of shine, and I'll get lost amongst the white background, but still add that dreamy halo that I love adding to Altenew's florals. So I'm using a watercolor brush, and I'll scatter this ink spray all around the background for that dreamy halo around this bouquet, so that this is the effect when your recipient opens their card. It's sort of dewy. It's not quite gold, not quite silver. I consider it to be like the vellum of splatter, just on a league of its own. I do want to add more shine to this background, so I'm going to try out these gem sparkles from Altenew. So I'm adding one of each size to my card background. After adding all of my desired embellishments to my card front, that finishes this card using the detailed blending brushes, which I hope to use more and incorporate into 2025, especially for the Altenew subscription products, like the Build a Garden, Altenew Craft a Flower, and any of the project kits that contain these floral ruffly images. I think these really fine ruffled details will elevate my projects going into 2025. The final tool that I want to showcase for 2024 is the Stampwheel 2.0. The Stampwheel 2.0, just like the original Stampwheel, has drastically changed the way I craft. And with the Altenew Stampwheel 2.0's detachable side, I've really started to think about my 8.5 by 11 inch Altenew stamp sets in a different way. My card compositions can be totally different now and are completely unrestricted. And as Altenew's Build a Garden sets become even bigger clusters of flowers, I think there are just so many more additional ways that you can be creative with your photopolymer stamps and the Stampwheel 2.0. But of course, my favorite thing to do with the Stampwheel 2.0 is to create multiple cards at once. I have already showcased this 4-in-1 technique in a previous perfect pairing. In that other perfect pairing, I did focus on more techniques and other images that you can use in the Stampwheel 2.0. This time I'll use the Bouquet of Poppies 8.5 by 11 inch stamp set and its coordinating stencil set. But first I'll stamp my images on my 8.5 by 11 inch sheet. Again, since I have the warm gray family of inks out already, I'll use evening gray to stamp the outline of this large bouquet image. Once I have this half of my panel stamped, I will rotate the paper instead of my flip plate. And the reason is, if I flip my flip plate 180 degrees, I will stamp my image on top of the existing one because my rotational center is right here. So with the detachable side, I have a lot more flexibility on where I can place my images, especially for these larger ones. I just feel like I have a lot more control now about where I can repeat stamp these images. And that's why I have this piece of satin masking tape on my Stampwheel sticky mat. This is my reference edge that I lined up on this side to act as my rotational point. So now that I've rotated my panel 180 degrees, I'll bump it back up to my edge here. And I know I had a small margin on the top and bottom of my panel. Then I can return my flip plate using the etch opening on the top of my flip plate as my guide. And now I know I just have to repeat stamp on this segment of my full 8.5 by 11 inch sheet. And that finishes the outline on the second half of my panel. I'll use a mix of dusty pink and blush rose to fill in the open areas of these poppies. And just like the previous translucent foliage card, I'm keeping the overall impression of these flowers pretty light. So with stencil number one on image A, now that I have this orientation, I can easily realign my image by rotating the stencil 180 degrees. And then I can quickly find my reference points by repeat stamping this large image using the Stampwheel 2.0. I'll repeat the dusty pink and blush rose glow on all of these poppies. So here's my blush rose and dusty pink blend. I want a little bit more control with the number 4 stencil, which fills in the majority of the foliage elements of this image. So I'm going to use the micro blending brush set. This is the number 10 size. And opposed to the detail blending brushes that I was showcasing earlier, I'm using the micro blending brush and its flat bristles this time to do the scrubbing motion and apply a halo of color to the base of the leaves and to the stems throughout the bouquet of poppies. For the impression that I want on this card, I just feel like the mini ink blending brushes are going to be just a little bit too big for the controlled application of ink that I want. So this is where I feel like the micro blending brushes fit in for these techniques, is when I want an even smaller and controlled application of ink. To fill in the centers of the poppies, I'm using a mini ink blending brush and Moon Rock to add a very clear and defined center to the poppies. Then I can rotate my stencil 180 degrees and quickly find my reference lines in the openings of the image and repeat this inking technique with the micro blending brushes on this half of my stencil. And I'll finish off the remaining foliage pieces found on stencil number 5 as well, using Morning Frost and Moon Rock. The illustration of Bouquet of Poppies reminds me of Chinese ink paintings, which is why I decided to stick to this two-tone hue throughout the ink blending of this image. Before I split apart this panel into my 4 cards, I'm going to add a very dilute jet black ink spray splatter throughout the open areas of this grouping of images. After completely filling the background and all the open areas between the poppy images with this dilute jet black ink spray splatter, I'm going to add some metallic watercolor splatter as well, and I'm using Gold Pearl just because it matches the first card I made. And I'll add this pigment more on top of the poppies themselves. Once this is dry, I can take it to my paper trimmer and cut each segment into 4¼ by 5½ inch panels. And now I have 4 panels ready for sentiments. Instead of using the sentiments found in the Bouquet of Poppies stamp set, I decided to mix it up with the Amy Tangerine collection, so I have Wild One and Shine Bright sentiments. And I will individually stamp each of these panels with a sentiment that I feel like fits inside of my card front. In my stamp wheel, I'm going to switch out the radial grid plate for the grid plate so that I know that my sentiments are horizontally straight on my card base. I'll stamp the sentiments in Obsidian pigment ink. Now I have 4 stamped panels ready for folded note card bases, and that finishes my last technique and tool that has changed the way I craft for 2024. I hope that you bring some of these techniques into 2025, and I'll be sure to be there with you for more perfect pairings into the new year. My series encourages you to shop your existing Altenew stash and rekindle their love with newer releases. Perfect Pairings with Jaycee airs on the Altenew channel every 2nd and 4th Sunday of the month. Please make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for tuning in to this perfect pairing episode with me, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hello there, crafty friend, Lydia here. Just popping in to say that you can get your daily dose of crafting tips, techniques and tutorials just like this by subscribing to the Altenew YouTube channel. All you need to do is click on that little bell up there and you will never miss a video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.